Welcome back to Common Sense Rhode Island. I'm Representative Patricia Morgan, and we have with us today Mike Cerullo, who is a member of What's Your Rush, RI.org, and you're reading the cannabis issue here.
Well, it's actually a pretty comprehensive issue that talks about the cannabis questions from both perspectives, which is what we were all about to start with. That was our goal when we started 3 years ago, to develop a rational, evidence-based conversation on these proposals that just 113 people are going to make a decision about. And we believe we need to get that information to the decision makers.
We need to get all of the information.
We need to have a fiscal study on true costs now and downstream. We need to, as again, at the NIH summit I attended, the very clear clarion call they made to people, to states that were early adopters of medical marijuana, which we were in 2006. And this is what the presenters said. It is essential to fix and update their statutes, regulations, and supply architectures. How it is grown from seed to sale. That's the supply architecture. And it must be done before any further consideration is given to legalization for recreational purposes.
You know, one of the things that strikes me about the medical marijuana, and I don't really want to talk about that so much, I want to talk more about recreational, but you're saying that it used to, the THC, which is the ingredient that produces the high, used to be 2 to 6%.
Correct.
Now it's 25%, and they're looking to get it up to 45%. That's about a high.
That's about a high.
Whereas the other, which is CBD,
cannabinoid.
which is what really we should have in the medical marijuana, because
Correct.
that stops the nausea and some of those real medicinal qualities of it. That's actually such a tiny part, and nobody's trying to grow a plant with more of the medical ingredient in it.
Right. The effort
That's something's wrong with that.
Well, it's about money. You know, again, at the AG's conference with some representatives of the industry presenting here in Rhode Island, their whole focus was on quality control for higher concentrations of THC.
But medical is supposed to have.
But medical is the place where the benefits are to society.
Yeah.
And we're not spending our time on that. Cannabinoids are about safety. Cannabinoids are about reduced risk to the population and medical benefits, and there are very likely some that will pass FDA scrutiny. There's one right now that's being developed to treat a particularly dangerous form, a very problematic form of seizures in children. But it's at the stage of FDA approval where there are very high, 50% in some cases, effectiveness rates, but also 17 or 18% don't reduce the seizures, they increase seizures.
Yeah, more
and
work
so
needs
forth.
to be
So
done.
that's a pretty high, right, exactly. But that's a pretty high side effect rate. And you know, what other medication would we tolerate that highest side effect rate without black box warnings?
Well, and let's not talk about medical marijuana right now, because
Okay.
it's recreational that's coming down the track. And you just talked about in the
The nuclear pot.
the nuclear pot, which is, what is that like? Is that a block? I don't
It
even
can
know what it looks like.
Well,
Is
it can be
like a
infused.
gum?
It can be honey, it's an oil, it's
A
a
butter
concentrate,
oil,
a butter,
okay.
it can be butter. There's a number of ways to make it. Kids make it with basically a flat iron and a piece of parchment paper.
But you said there's pesticides in it, there's carcinogens in it?
It's a concentrate. So if pesticides were used and you're drawing out all of the concentrated THC, you're also concentrating at the same time other parts of the plant. So we know that there are naturally occurring fungi. Those can get concentrated. We know that there are, if you're going to use a solvent like butane or methyl alcohol, you're going to concentrate what amounts to a carcinogen. You're going to concentrate that. And of course, pesticides. If pesticides are used, then you're going to concentrate those. What are acceptable concentrations of that?
Well, I
We
mean,
don't
I
know
can
yet.
remember when we couldn't eat bacon for a while because that had carcinogens in it. So I can't imagine saying, go ahead and have this hash oil. Is that what it's called? Hash oil.
Yeah.
But so we know that there are real physical medical
Sure.
conditions that come from this. We also know that it can affect brain development.
That's correct.
We also know it can lead to addictions. It can be a gateway
Correct.
for some folks into
Correct.
higher, more
Right.
dangerous kinds of drugs.
We know
That's
that
a
we
lot
can
of
have,
stuff.
we know today with lots of research that you can have cannabis-induced sleep disorders, which are huge problems. Anybody with a sleep disorder is at very high risk for other kinds of mental health conditions. It can induce psychosis. There's cannabis-induced psychosis. There's cannabis-induced anxiety disorder, which is kind of...
Well, and motivation too.
Motivation.
I know folks who have
Right.
they get so involved
Exactly.
in just being high and floating along, purple haze, I think it's called, that they don't use their full potential. They don't get out there and
That is common when I'm sitting and talking with an adolescent, and they're very honest about it. They're very honest about it. That they no longer have the kind of motivation they used to have. We know that that there is a thing called an amotivational syndrome. We know that's connected with marijuana. We know that it not only affects motivation to do things on a daily basis, but it also affects the motivation to stop using a substance of any kind. It's really very complex. The major point that they made at the NIH is that we know very little about marijuana
So we've
compared to
just
what it is we
scratched the
don't
surface.
know. We know we need to know a whole lot more about what it does.
And because other states have already legalized it, like Colorado, what's Colorado, Oregon?
Washington, Oregon, and Alaska.
Okay, so scientists are able to go there and find a large enough samples to actually start studying it and come up with the answers that we need.
Right, and the NIH and the FDA and the federal government is making it more accessible to do that kind of thing.
Giving them permissions
right,
to do
because we still have the paradox of states approving what is on a federal level illegal. So you've got that tension between those two things.
Yeah.
And that affects a number of areas.
Well, and let me just, we're running out of
Sure,
time here.
sure.
I mean, so we know from what you've been telling us that there's still a lot of study that has to take place because there are dangers out there. There's medical dangers, neurological dangers, motivational dangers, addiction dangers, and we're starting to get there.
That's correct.
Studies are being done, we're starting to get there. And the only thing that I can see is what people want us, don't look at this, they want us to look at this pot of money that we can get from sales tax on recreational marijuana. To me, that's just the wrong way to look at public policy. I think we need to get all of the information and find out whether the money, and really giving government more money is never an excuse to me for making bad policy.
If I were a businessman today and I went into my boss and said, I've got a great idea, it's going to sell millions, billions. My boss is going to ask me, so let's see the cost-benefit analysis. Let's see the true costs and let's project them downstream. We haven't done that. No one that's talking about this has done that.
It yet, and we're getting there. So what's the rush? We need to take our time. We need to really get all of the information, come up with sensible regulations if we're going to do this. Not make it about the money, but make it about what's best for Rhode Islanders. So anyway, thank you for coming. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Representative.
And we'll see you all next week.